In the May 6th local election bonanza, this is the place to watch if you want to find out if Labour has a fighting chance against the Conservatives in England. Last time around, Labour's red wall was breached when Tory candidate and former John Lewis boss Andy Street won the race to be mayor of the West Midlands. Now Liam Byrne must prove that Labour can win back those disaffected voters.
I think most people in the Labour movement know that the race in the West Midlands is probably the most important race this year that Labour contends. The defeat that we had in December 2019 was really significant. And a lot of people actually in the media and elsewhere have underestimated quite the depth of that defeat.
There's been some criticism about Keir Starmer's leadership, about people not knowing what he stands for. Do you think that's fair?
When we take Keir out and about in the West Midlands, we try and walk him through markets and that kind of thing. There's a real enthusiasm to actually, come over, have a chat, listen, talk, share some views. He's clever, he's intelligent, and he's straightforward. Anybody who's kind of watching Prime Minister's Questions and just watching the forensic way he takes apart Boris the blusterer, people just sort of respect that.
At the same time, though, you're obviously critical of Boris Johnson, but he did manage to take 6 seats off Labour at the last election in 2019 in your area. It feels like people in the West Midlands might quite like the idea of Boris Johnson as well.
I spent more time on the streets of the West Midlands during that election than pretty much any other politician in our region. And I can tell you overwhelmingly what people talked about was Brexit and Jeremy Corbyn. And even amongst many Tories I met, people who said, they'd always been voting Tory, you tended to find people say, well, we do kind of think that it's time for a change. I'm afraid we don't like Mr. Corbyn. And people would often describe Boris as a bit of a clown. And so they weren't in love with that. They did want to get Brexit done. And, the truth was they didn't trust our leader at the time.
You should beat Andy Street easily then. Is that what you're anticipating?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I mean, obviously it's difficult when you don't have polls. We found door knocking has gone really well. People are quite keen. People are quite pleased to see us kind of turn up. And our numbers coming back look great. So, yeah, we'll do well.
What do you think the main issues are that you're fighting on in the West Midlands?
The number one issue by a mile is jobs, jobs, jobs. People are super worried about the economy, the livelihoods of small business, and basically how we get back on our feet as fast as possible.
The Conservative Party candidate is duly elected as Mayor for the West Midlands Combined Authority.
Andy Street, who narrowly won the 2017 election to become the region's first mayor, agrees that recovery from coronavirus needs to be the priority.
So I think there's one overwhelming issue, Sophie, and that's how we're going to bounce back from the pandemic. So obviously this was a region that was performing very well before the pandemic, but we've had a horrible swipe left from the pandemic, lots of job losses. So the big question is, who is going to lead the economic recovery of this region?
This contest is also going to be looked through the prism of Boris Johnson versus Keir Starmer as well. It's a region that is a key electoral battleground for both parties. Both Labour and the Conservatives really need to win it, frankly. The Conservatives obviously did better in 2019. How do you think Keir Starmer goes down in the red wall then?
I'm waiting to see the answer to that. This election will tell us something about that. What I hope it will tell us is actually the idea that we did very well in the red wall on the back of Brexit and the feeling about Jeremy Corbyn, and that was about it. I think we will prove that's wrong. I think what's going to be proved is that support for the Conservative Party in the areas that we describe as the red wall is actually about something much, much deeper. And primarily, it's about local Conservatives, whether they be MPs, mayors or local councils, really delivering for people. And if you think of the investment that's come into the Black Country, come into Northfield, the only seat that we won in Birmingham, come into these areas, there is clear evidence that Conservatives deliver for the areas that arguably have been left behind. That's what it's really all about.
I've just spoke to Liam Byrne before talking to you. I have to say, he seemed pretty confident. He seemed to think that he was going to win quite comfortably. Are you worried?
I don't think anyone's going to win comfortably. I think it's going to be very, very close race. The last mayoral race was very close. The general election was very close here. So I'm prepared to predict it'll be close again. And I'm actually quite surprised that he was confident, because I think, and the feedback I get, is that it's really, really contested. We are confident of our position, but no, it's going to be very, very close in the end.
To give a sense of how close this race could be, there are 28 Westminster constituencies across the region that the West Midlands Mayor controls. In the last general election in 2019, 14 of them were won by the Conservative Party. The other 14 were won by Labour. Nearly 1.2 million votes were cast, but there was less than 3,000 votes between the two main parties. And the West Midlands was part of a wider story. 6 previously Labour seats, some of which had been held by the party for decades, turned blue as Boris Johnson ate into the so-called Red Wall. And it's this that gives the West Midlands race an added significance. It will be an indicator of how far Boris Johnson has kept those Red Wall voters on side, and a test of Keir Starmer's ability to win them back to Labour.
It will be a setback for the government if they don't hold this. Everything suggests it's going to be tight. It was tight last time round when Andy Street managed this surprise victory. You've got really factors on either side that are quite hard to calculate. On his side, he's very popular for his business background, for the John Lewis history that he has, for the real efforts that he's made to improve the area. But he's been quite quiet. He's a reserved personality. And he's had what you might say as a handicap during the pandemic of coming from the same party as the government. That's not a problem that has affected Labour mayors. I think it is the kind of place where Keir Starmer has to show that he's getting through to people, that he's got something to say.
The race for the West Midlands is unusually seen as a must-win for both parties. Whatever happens on the 6th of May, it's likely to be very close.